Thank you. Yes. We'll start from where we stopped last week. Effectively, we were looking at the financial structures, and we were trying to analyze the financial structures from the perspective of economic analysis. And you have seen to great extent the financial structures in the form of both direct financial structures and also in the form of indirect financial structures. And by saying direct, I was emphasizing the fact that the direct financing structures are mainly of directly sourcing required funds to the organizations by issuing debt instruments or securities by the organization or individual concerned, right? So stock markets, debt market, this is all facilitated. But when it comes to indirect, that is financial intermediaries, they are the ones sourcing funds for the agency concerned. So the role of a financial intermediary is so important in an indirect financial structure, right? So then we were looking at the basic facts, 8 basic facts of these financial structures. And we were trying to start discussing the transaction cost. This is where we stopped in our discussion last week. Okay, so I was mentioning these 8 financial, the facts that we are looking at would help us to understand the nature of a financial structure, right? But from a broader perspective, whether your financial markets are well developed and having a well capitalized capital formation structures, does not necessarily say that those markets are highly direct finance driven. That means equity, that means stocks, or debt, like corporate bonds or other direct debt driven structures. While these developments continue to shape up the financial markets are still very important in terms of the role played by financial intermediaries. Financial intermediaries continue to play a very, very important role in financial structures. So mainly their nature of engagement is indirect, but even the markets who have well-developed infrastructure, systems, and capacity, still the indirect finance role continue to expand. So this is where we stopped our discussion last week. So I'll be able to continue from there, and we can move on discussing the transaction cost. Transaction cost is another aspect that's very important to say that, right? These financial intermediaries that we are looking at effectively evolve to reduce the transaction cost. Okay, so any financial transaction that has a cost components, but what these financial structures that we are looking at here is from the perspective of indirect financial structures, where financial intermediation, all these banks, other financial intermediaries, they have evolved in order to reduce the so-called transaction costs. And this economies of scale, you probably learned about this scale economies. As your production increases, expands, the average cost of production decreases when you have a scale benefit. So this is what economies of scale talk about, right? Are the cost advantages that enterprises obtain due to size, expansion, output, And then, of course, scale of operation. You have a capacity to service 100 units, but you only service 200 units. So expanding the capacity from 200 to 1,000, right? So you see, you can gradually reduce the average cost because you are not going to increase the fixed cost in the exercise, right? Okay, so with such an operation, the cost per unit naturally decreases. Okay, with that, scale benefits increases in organization, simply because what cost that you will incur by expanding the production cycle is the operational cost of the production cycle, but not the fixed cost, because fixed cost is already given. So whether you produce 100 units or 200 units, fixed cost appears to be more or less same. But what changes with 100 to 200 is the operational cost, inputs, certain type of other variable costs. So these are the ones changes, right? So more unit you produced within the capacity, you are benefited by reducing the average cost of production. The economies of scale argument is brought into the financial intermediaries by engaging them for a bigger number of units in an economy rather than individual. They themselves going and trying to source finances, or firms, they're going to source finances from capital markets. So that is direct finance. That is also possible. But then, of course, this cost of raising funds through transaction cost that we are discussing here, that gradually bring down as more units being serviced by financial intermediaries. On top of that, financial intermediaries build expertise, okay, build interaction, relationship, so through which the financial intermediaries have an understanding of how to manage the cost elements. So that brings additional advantage to the financial markets, financial structures, and that helps these organizations to benefit from intermediation. That's what we put here: the expertise, skill, knowledge, that's all bring into the equation by the financial intermediaries. They have the listing arrangements, they have a specialized arm for marketing, they have specialized arm for contractual review, they have specialized arm for legal and regulatory considerations, they have expertise arm for technical as well as infrastructure related. So these are all related aspects of a financial contract. So the financial intermediaries have all these things. If you really wanted to raise funds on your own, you had to build these capacities, or you had to get the services of such providers. But being a financial intermediaries, having all this and also spreaded this out for large number of clientele, they are always in a better position to reduce the transaction cost. And this also another argument, role of financial intermediaries in financial structures, right? So you can see this explanation in terms of economies of scale and average cost. You see, as you increases the production from Q to Q2, okay, what you simply see is cost also reduces from C to C1. So what you are basically seeing is this long run average cost curve, as the cost curve in terms of fixed cost is reasonably built here, you can expand without incurring any additional higher fixed cost here. But beyond this point, you see organizations become crowded. Employees cannot work freely. For instance, if you take a line-based employment, for instance, in the garment factories, you have 4 cutting machines. You require 6 people to work. So when you see all 6 is working, let's assume that you can increase the production from Q to Q2. But more than 6 means that additional person makes that unit crowded. and their work efficiency reduces. So then gradually the long run average cost also tend to increase beyond this point. So if you wanted to see beyond this a production enhancement, you have to basically see the capacity or the capital cost has to be enhanced, more capital cost and more capacity in the organization being built. So this is how you look at these economies of scale and average cost. More the production, more the units being produced, your individual unit production cost reduces, right? So this is an additional benefit the financial intermediaries bring into the financial structures. Any question you have before I move on to the next slide? You see this element is also applied to great extent in not only in financial market, but also in economics as well as in engineering in today's context. Even in commerce and business, they use this because the economies of scale benefits is another area of expertise which basically helps financial industries, financial markets to better service its clients. So the financial intermediaries like banks, insurance companies, and also to some extent a one-stop shop financial intermediaries, they provide everything under one roof, right? So that also a benefit that they are looking at. All these doing business indicators that we are talking in today's context to bring your economy, country to a very high position of doing business indicators means you are basically bringing down additional cost engaged in different activities of a business process, right? So you don't need to have different places. You can bring in all organizations to one location, online arrangements rather than physically wasting your time. Additional cost also involved in such exercises. But what you are basically seeing is so-called economies of scale and also these arrangements to reduce average cost in terms of doing business indicators. Now the markets are so keenly follow up would also facilitate financial structures to favor indirect finance. And financial intermediaries are better equipped to service their clienteles with a lower cost in this context. And it's very clear by looking at additional different type of activities involved in a usual business process and then comparing that with expertise already built and placed with the financial intermediary who can extend that to the industry or to the financial market. Right. So then another very, very interesting and important aspect that is related to so-called asymmetry of information. And in any financial market and in any studies of financial markets and its economic implication, the asymmetric information concepts remain one of the keys which makes market differs from one to the other and also which determines how efficient a market is. Okay, so asymmetric information is another very important aspect. What it broadly tells you is, okay, people or party to transactions do not process equal amount of information, right? So even if you see equal amount of information is available in public domain, the capacity to understand and skill to review and required know-how is different from one person to the other. Even among you all, when I explain this concept, some get it straight away understood. Some requires additional effort, additional reading. That's the different expertise you have. Some are very good in this field. Some are very knowledgeable in some of these concepts. whereas others would be very good in some other, not necessarily this. So the information that is freely available for everybody through a handout like this would not be grasped equally by all the students. It differs. Similarly, in a financial market, there are many information, at least minimum required information that's available. But then, of course, how to source them, how quickly you can benefit from such information is differs from person to person. Asymmetric information is that party to transaction owns different amount of information. Asymmetry, not symmetry. Symmetry is equality. Asymmetry is unequal information in the market. So through this asymmetry, you will see two very important sub-concepts, that is adverse selection and moral hazard. And you probably hear this adverse selection and moral hazard repeatedly throughout this discussion. Right? Throughout this program, you will hear these concepts being repeated, because this engage almost everything financial market do for the market structures and other related areas of concentration. What do you mean by adverse selection? Very simply, wrong selection. Okay? You basically see here the possibility of a bad or a risky trading partners, or you enter a contract with a party or a financial intermediary, enter a contract with a borrower. This borrower is a bad or risky, but because of this bad or risky trading partners in transactions in the financial markets, generally they drive away good or less risky ones. If not, good or less risky ones would take time to establish them as good or less risky in the eyes of financial intermediaries. When you go for the first time, they would not know you. Even if it is not the first time, this is after many times, still financial intermediaries keep the possibility that their contractual obligation become risky. So the adverse selection always occurs before the transaction being established. Before you enter into a contract, either you select a good one, either you select a bad one. But in the eyes of financial intermediaries, the banks, insurance companies, they look at all the contractors are possible risky trading partners, and they price in line with that. Even if you go and do a health insurance, the insurance organization would look at you as a health risk, and you probably have possibilities of not necessarily completing the full cycle of your health insurance. You probably coming to get a health insurance simply because you yourself estimate the probability that you will get sick, or to prevent from such possibilities, and your probability of getting such possibility is very high. So the market's price by looking at that as the average. That's where the all aspects being looked at in adverse selection. So the adverse selection would be a very serious consideration in any transaction, and this happens before the transactions. So the financial markets will do everything to minimize the possibilities of adverse selection. They can say that they would necessarily take out adverse selection from the equation. It's not possible. As I said, even a prime customer could become a bad or risky customer due to market developments, right? So these are possibilities, right? So you cannot avoid that you are completely taking out adverse selection from the equation. So you try as financial intermediaries to minimize the adverse selection in the exercise. Okay, so the moral hazard. The moral hazard happens after the transaction. Adverse selection before the transaction, moral hazard after the transactions. You have godfathers. You know, if anything happens to you, your parents will look after you. So you get that complacency, right? Similarly, the banks become complacent that the central banks would look after them. They are godfathers. They would extend liquidity. They would extend credit lines, where the other market participants, like other banks, would not give them, and they would really wait it to see that you are collapsing, because your business also can be taken over by them, right? So these are possibilities. The moral hazard happens is when you have the medical insurance, you become carefree, careless. When you have a motor insurance, you drive risky, right? So you look at a person who is having a third-party insurance, motor vehicle insurance, and a person who is having a full insurance for motor vehicles. The person who is having a third party would be little more careful and mindful compared to a full insurance motor full insurance owner. Probably he would be not that concerned, because anything happens, he can fall back on his insurance. Whereas the third party insurer would be concerned of his possible financial impact. So these are the moral hazard possibilities. You do not necessarily follow the guidelines of transactions, and you become a risk lover once you enter the transaction. So similarly, when you get into a financial contract, you would reveal many information about your project. And you also take precaution in terms of standards of best operational guidelines. But once you start the business, you probably not look at those standards of best practices into the equation, simply because you probably have additional cost in such protected arrangements, whereas you are mindful of meeting your targets and to produce as much as possible in the production cycle. You also see sometimes you engage machineries. The machineries has straight through capacities of, let's say, 1,000 units. And after each 1,000 units of production, machine requires to be kept on sleep mode, or required a rest to the machine of 24 hours. But when you see that you have to fulfill your orders, you probably take out that from the equation, and you continuously produce more than 1,000, and also ignore the required rest cycles of the machines. And as a result, the lifetime of the machine get reduced, if not depreciated fast, right? So this is a moral hazard. At the time of you are getting financial intermediaries to fund you for the expansion of the project or buying this machine, you probably agreed with all that. The moral hazard is such that you take extra incentive in taking risk after getting into the transaction. Okay, so this means lack of incentive to guard against risk. Okay, where one is protected from its consequences because you have a fallback, you have a medical insurance, so you eat too much of food, you are not worried about your health, right? Similarly, you probably not drive safely because you have a full insurance. You would not take serious of your a career or how best you have to do your studies, because until you really kind of come to a point, your parents will look after you, right? So this is the moral hazard probability. So in any financial market, the adverse selection that happens before the transaction, moral hazard after the transaction, this is mainly happens because of this asymmetry. The parties to the transactions do not have all the required information. At least intentions are not necessarily right. And the possible behavior before and after a transaction also different, right? So you are very revealing and give all the informations to the financial intermediary before the transaction to get your project loan approved. Once this is approved, you probably hide the information of your project, right? So this is the moral hazard. So the financial intermediaries, because of these possibilities, even you are a very genuine, very right and forward a person who is having a very clear project proposal, would look at that proposal with that element of probability of risk, and they price their product accordingly for both adverse selection as well as for the moral hazard. So the financial intermediaries wanted their protection because they source their resources from depositors who are the probability. So this is very much of a concern in all the financial market. Okay, so the agency theory that we probably be looking at is concerned with resolving problems that can exist in agency relationships. It is also part of this asymmetry, but this agency theory is looking at so-called principal agent problem. Principal, who is the principal? He is the owners of a project. And once a firm becomes too big and too complex and complicated, the owners would not be the managers or the operational members, simply because you have resources, you have some understanding, you have knowledge. You would not be able to do everything the organization requires. Let's assume you have a hotel industry. You are in tourism, travel and tourism business. But your first priority and your expertise is, let's say, medical. You are a doctor. So your background and expertise is to treat and recognize ailments in people. Or let's say you are a vet in animals. Okay, so your expertise is that. But when you invest and you put your money into a business in the form of travel and tourism, you require to hire people. So you are the principal shareholder. The managers that you employed are the agents of you. So the principal agent problem the agency theory suggests is that there is a genuine conflict where the agents would try to maximize the benefits for the organization as well as for them without really kind of factoring principles, standard, and best practices established. So you probably see, yes, as I was mentioning, you have to do machine arrest. You have to have the cycles of operation, right? But when the managers see they have more benefits in the form of bonuses and additional pay if they produce more and show profits, they would not necessarily look at lasting of projects, machinery, and equipment. Maybe it's 100-year machinery on standard usage. They would not bother whether it's lasting for 100 years or so. They would only look at how much they can produce and make profits to the organization, through which they would get additional benefits. So there is a problem between the principal and agent. So this is told as principal agent problem. Okay, so the asymmetric information how that makes this and affect this economic behavior of principals and agents would be another aspect that the agency theory is reviewing. So this is a very important aspect that the people and the financial markets look at. So please take little care in kind of reading this and try to understand it and try to relate this to the probabilities in the financial markets and in and around you, from genuine experiences that you have and the people you know, and you can interpret them and get a kind of a very clear understanding. Any questions? Right. So you see here the adverse selection, the moral hazard, and then principal agent problem, that is agency theory. So how this further being reviewed and evaluated? There is a famous concept called Lemon's problem. Okay, so this Lemon's problem is one of the very simple, straightforward paper you all can download. The market for lemons, not limes. Okay, so from a general parlance, limes are better and lemons are inferior. That's the kind of general understanding in, at least in Anglo-Saxon markets. Okay, that means the lemons are less in quality. Okay, so there is a paper in 1970, the market for lemons, quality, uncertainty, and the market mechanism, by a famous economist, George Akerlof, right, which examines how the quality of goods traded in the market can degrade in the presence of information asymmetry between buyers and sellers, leaving only lemons behind. So everybody takes out limes from the market and only lemons is available for sale. That means less and inferior in quality. Good ones goes out from the equation. So this is famous for used car market throughout the world. They call it all the used cars available in the market have some inferiority or quality issue. Only the seller or the current owner would know the real standard or status of the used car. Buyer would not necessarily know even after getting an expert opinion, expert review. There are various ways through which that you can hide the probable damage or effect to the original vehicle. So the used cars available in the market naturally gets the kind of a feel the car or the vehicle has some inferiority, and because of that reason the price the market ready to pay for used cars is not necessarily the right price for a quality used car that is ready to be sold in the market. So the good, used, and genuine spare parts being applied and also maintained by the let's say the agent itself, and being kind of maintained like very much of a brand new, still gets a same price as the other used car, probably somewhat higher based on the appearance, the quality and things like that, but still would not necessarily get the price the buyer wants, sorry, the seller wants. And as a result, all the sellers of quality cars take out the cars from the market, and what is left is the average or inferior. So the price in the market is determined by the average, right? So this is the Lemon's problem. Okay, so where the quality cannot be assessed, you can assess the used car market. Yeah, you can take that to a quality motor vehicle assessor and you can still assess it. but the assessor also would not necessarily be able to fully unearth the entirety of the users, the using and other related considerations. So that would not necessarily reflect the general assessments they do. Okay, so when the quality cannot be assessed like that, buyer, whoever buys, whether it is high quality or average, he himself thinks maybe there's something there, so I have to price for it, and he is not necessarily willing to buy at that extra premium price. So what he generally does is the buyer is willing to pay at most a price that reflects the average quality, not the premium high quality of the vehicle, irrespective of whether it's maintained like that or not. Seller of a good quality item will not want to sell because of this average price determined for average quality products. Okay, so buyer will ultimately decide not to buy at all because all the left in the market is poor quality items, because sellers pull out because they simply see average price is not right for them. They want a higher price, so it's not worth selling, so he takes the quality car out. So what is left in the market is the average quality ones. So then the buyer thinks from another perspective, why should I buy? I will wait and build little more wealth and go for a brand new. Okay, because all that left in the market is poor quality. So this is the lemon problem. In financial markets, this being kind of a problem because of adverse selection. And this explanation that we discussed actually highlight the role of financial intermediaries. And if you look at the facts, 8 basic facts that we were looking, this explains fact number 2 and partially explains fact number 1. So what are these fact number 2 and fact number 1? Fact number 2 is issuing marketable debt and quality securities is not the primary way in which businesses finance their operations, right? So you yourself trying to raise funds is not the primary way, but you use financial intermediaries. That's why you use financial intermediaries. And for the financial structure to solve the adverse selection driven lemon problems possibilities, you use financial intermediaries in the exercise to make sure that your project finances are met. Okay, and necessarily talk about link to the second one is the direct finance are not the most important source of external financing for businesses, right? So when you go for a financial intermediary driven indirect finance, and that favors because of the problems around, right? Even if you are capable of analyzing, reading, still there's a possibility that you will not be completely possible to do all the related tasks. So you better look at financial intermediaries who have already built some expertise, right? So naturally, when you see indirect finance is favored here, direct finance is not the most important source of external financing for organization. So this is explained through the adverse selection problem now we were highlighting here, right? So likewise, each and every problem and explanations that we are now going to discuss would link with the related facts, the 8 basic facts that we were discussing. So I would not necessarily go back and compare them and highlight going forward. You will be able to do that once you kind of get a feel on the discussion. Okay, right. So what are the other elements to solve adverse selection problems in financial markets? You know, it's the biggest, if not the most important aspects in financial markets in terms of looking at these adverse selection being minimized. So what are the possibilities? What are the tools they use? So we'll take one by one and try to understand. Okay. Right. So the first possible tool is private production and sale of information. Adverse selection. Okay. Adverse selection, you select the wrong party to the transaction. So because of that, you yourself decide, no, I don't want to, I will do. These are self-sufficiency aspects like. But this is not possible for everything. But for some, yes. Private production and sale of information. If not, I build myself all the background and capacity, and also I review and evaluate all the information, and I build my own assessment, and I sell that assessments to the rest of the market. So the market has to pay for you and buy this. This would solve the free rider problems. This is like the free riders who are there, for instance, examinations. There are many people, they don't study. They come to the exams with the expectation that they could copy it from somebody else or try to do something that is not morally as well as ethically right, as well as not accepted ways of facing exams, right? So they are free riders. They depend on others. They do not contribute. And for instance, group assignments. They are members of the group, but necessarily they are a baggage to the entire group. They don't contribute. They don't participate, right? So they're basically kind of score from other members in the group. So because of this reason, right, in some possibilities, the markets try to make sure, no, it should be an individual assignment. You have to face it yourself and show that you are capable to reduce the dependence on free riding. Okay, so you privately produce or you sale of information. You yourself study, you have the background, you nicely answer, you get the concept in, and then you build a capacity to analyze and review the question. You are ready to help others, but at a fee. You will say, yes, I will coach you. I will review this and give it to you. I will do the assignments for you. I have seen advertisements, even theses, dissertations, research reports. There are many people who are ready to do for you, right? Editorials, right? Guidance of writing, right? All kind of facilities available, but you have to pay. So it's the right price, fine. So it's another market, but actually that to some extent help so-called wrong people being selected, right? So then you see government regulation to increase information. You know, all these problems coming from asymmetry. So some would reveal, some would not reveal information. You probably go to a company, you would only hear what you wanted to, and publicly they wanted to highlight, not necessarily the information that is not good at that particular moment of time. So they would not openly tell that. Even if you go to a medical institution, probably they would not reveal the standards of the arrangements there, even the problems they are going through, right? But the government imposes minimum standards of information that requires to be published. And even in the stock markets, even in securities and exchange related facilities, right? Minimum standards of information, audited reports, audited accounts. You have to publish audited accounts within 3 months of end of a financial year. This is a minimum standard. Similarly, the regulators would ask banks to reveal the details of the assets that they own, details of the liabilities that they have established, details of senior management, who runs the organization. changes to the senior management, they have to announce in advance, not at the 11th hour. Tomorrow, the CEO is resigned. No, they have to mention that the CEO would resign if he is making a resign announcement, resignation in advance, and give some time. Or if they are going to have a change in board of directors, the chairmen and the others, they in advance announce to the market. So the market would gradually get to know, and they have enough time to accommodate those information. So these minimum standards being followed up by governments and the regulators through regulation to establish at least the minimum required information is available for parties to review and analyze. If not, parties would not necessarily have even that information. So that is at least something they have. Now they can depend on. And the regulators would do this type of things through supervision, on-site, off-site. On-site is you visit to the place of operation or to the bank itself. You visit to the site. Off-site is no. Banks have to produce information and submit it to the regulator on a periodic basis through electronic mode, through other online arrangements, and through which the regulator would review and analyze. Right? So this is the process that the financial intermediaries go through, financial markets follow. Right? So when you see this type of the problems of adverse selection, right? The solutions are, as we were talking, the private production and sale of information, the government bringing in minimum standards of information revelation. So at least you can reduce the possibilities of selecting the wrong party. Even for a job, you require at least a first degree. So these are minimum standards, right? Even in cases where you wanted to get into certain type of the institution, you need not only a first degree, but the degree with classes, minimum GPA scores, language proficiency levels, right? Certain type of employments required certain BMIs, okay? The physics, right? Height, appearance, all matters. So the minimum standards being defined to make sure they don't select the wrong person. Similarly, the financial intermediation. So most of the facts that you probably look at, 3, 4, and 6, would be solved by financial intermediation. Because financial intermediation have established certain type of arrangements that facilitate reducing or minimizing the possibilities of adverse selection. Then collateral and net worth. Collateral. When you want to borrow funds from financial intermediaries, you have to pledge your motor vehicle. You have to pledge your assets, your house, right? If not, you have to surrender your salary to that organization. So salary payment would go through that bank account. So naturally, bank would reduce standing instructions. Okay, if not net worth, you are a high net worth individual, you have assets everywhere, so everybody ready to accept. Even courts would bail you out with sureties. They have to come, they have to sign, right? So these are the possibilities of solving so-called adverse or the wrong selection in the exercise. So you see, collateral and net worth is one worth exercise of reducing the risk to the financial intermediaries. Financial intermediaries would worry that, okay, I lend to this party, okay, I get the interest, fine, but if they are doing a moral hazard after all this adverse selection, they have a fallback through collateral or the net worth, right? So the financial intermediaries have the expertise and the know-how to evaluate the proposals much better than an average individual. So that would at least reduce the selecting the wrong party, right? So financial intermediation is favored in such circumstances. The government has regulations to publish, reveal at least minimum standards of information. So otherwise, you yourself produce the information and sale of this information. You know how to evaluate them. Okay, so you yourself do the work and then sell them for people to buy them and make use of that information, right? Even you may write software programs, you may develop certain packages, you may help organizations to build intelligence, right? That's required for some type of activities. So that's all so-called selecting the wrong party, adverse selection. Any questions before I move on? Okay. So then you see the moral hazard that we were discussing. This happens after the transaction. Okay, you become complacent because you have a insurance cover. Okay, so this moral hazard probability actually influence the choice between whether you go for a debt contract where you borrow or you yourself invest. Okay, you yourself invest means you are a little more mindful, it's your resources. Whereas if it is somebody else's debt contract, you are a little complacent. So then, of course, we come to the point that the principal agent problem we discussed as agency theory, where you are yourself invest means it's an equity contract that you are proposing, right? So then the agents would not necessarily, it's not their equity, it's the principal's equity. Agents are the managers. But interestingly, these agents are very much aware of the conditions of operation, and they are the ones who are experts in that field. That's why you have hired them and employed them, right? You are not the expert in that field, but you have a general understanding, but you have the money and resources. So you have built the business by investing money into that, right? You are the stock owner, the main owner, right? So you have equity contract. Agents, they don't have equity contract. But principal agent problem says agents would maximize their benefits at the expense of principals, and this drives the possibility the principal would decide whether it's right for me to expand my equity rights or I would go and expand the debt contract. So he himself become to some extent taking a moral hazard position because he is little mindful of the principal agent probabilities. So to avoid that, he himself not putting his own, and he would look at it differently. Give me a second. I have a call, urgent call. Thank you. Right. So you see this principal agent problem, right? So that again drives the parties to the enterprise to select between debt and equity contracts. So that is also a very interesting aspect of agency theory that you will be looking at, right? So again here, the principal also kind of reviewing his engagement to the best business in the form of a possible moral hazard. He is little worried to put his own resources, equities, and try to rely on a debt contract. That means a third party resources, because financial intermediaries lend when it comes to debt contract or other parties. Okay, so through which he tries to kind of minimize the principal agent problem. But in realistic sense, right, so he is having difficulties in terms of putting his own money into the firm, simply because he has some difficulty of accepting the agent's profit maximizing objectives. The agents, the managers would strive towards maximizing the profits, and through which they probably would drive the organization and the managers to have short-term high benefits in place of long-term more sustained organization profit possibilities, right? So this is the way in which the markets operate. So then you see there are ways through which separation of ownership and control of the firm being proposed. There are various ways through which this is looked at in agency theory, where the managers, as you already know, pursue personal benefits and power rather than the long-term profitability of the firm. They probably make use of resources available and try to maximize the possible profit benefits by employing them in the short run, irrespective of looking at the sustained production cycles for a long-term benefit of the organization. So they try to kind of foresee some control arrangements in the organization or the ownership separations, right? So that is why in certain instances you find single ownership limits being established, especially in financial intermediation. One person cannot exceed X amount of stake in a bank, let's say 10%. Right? So you bring in much more diversity into the equation. So the principals also started getting a broader spectrum and aspects into the equation. Or you bring in different expertise into the ownership category, through which some control of the firm can be again established. Again, to reduce so-called moral hazard possibilities. And then, of course, the owners also would favor, to some extent, equity contracts, and also build arrangements to manage the agent's profit maximization objective. Okay, so these are the elements that you see in organizations, and organizations are aggressively looking at ways and means through which they address these possibilities in today's context. And then you see there are other ways, other tools that also being used to solve principal agent problem, the agency theory that we were talking about. Okay, so they employ monitoring. It's like policy. They put police. I mean, it's costly. Okay, you build factories, you build a CCTV arrangement. It's additional cost. You can monitor, or you establish the cross-check points, right? Even taxation is built on the basis of value addition at different stages of a production cycle. So you know how much of input being released at one plant. So you can naturally calculate for that amount of inputs, what would be the outputs you generate. Right? These are monitoring mechanisms you have to employ for such possibilities. expertise, special skills, technology, you have to use those. But these are ways through which you can solve the agents trying to maximize their profit motives in the absence of more sustained profitability for the organization. Okay, so even policing is something. Even you have applied this type of arrangements by bringing in additional security, but it's challenging. Okay, so remote arrangements through which you verify all incoming and outgoing facilities to the organization. There are various ways of looking at these things in today's context. And also, this would actually help free riders, people who employed and working but not contributing. Even in exams, you see various ways of monitoring. As I was mentioning, one is electronic monitoring, CCTV monitoring, right? Direct voice. There are exams, for instance, you have taken GMAT, GRE, even English language tests like TOEFL, whatever that you see. These are like you have to face for yourself, and then of course follow through. These are monitoring ways in which that you contribute to. And even the people who take those as supervisors being monitored through other arrangements. The various ways of solving these, but interestingly, that has some element of costs. Then you see the government regulation to increase information. This we have already discussed. Okay, so you have government regulation to increase information. What you are basically seeing is minimum standards of information that been discharged. Audit requirements, right? So then minimum publication requirements, minimum standards of information. As I was mentioning, the stock markets have Colombo Stock Exchange, Security and Exchange Commission, the banks by the central bank imposed regulations, the primary dealers in terms of the minimum buying and selling quotes for government securities, then publication of their accounts, okay, audited accounts, non-audited. There are various arrangements that the regulations place to increase information available to the market, through which you can address the fact 5. You can go and kind of compare what is this number 5, fact 5 there. Then again, you see, even to solve principal agent problem, debt contracts, we to some extent looked at it in the previous slide also, right? So instead of equity contracts, debt contracts help because financial intermediary, they themselves keep an eye on what the organization does. They don't just lend and keep away. They have requirements. They have periodic review missions. They visit the organizations. They have other periodic statements to be financial statement and operational statements being shared with the financial intermediaries. They look at those stuff. So some debt contracts solve principal agent problem, and the principal make sure that his ownership rights being maintained, but not necessarily his additional pumping of resources that's been checked with debt arrangements. Then the financial intermediation. Irrespective of all the concerns, right? Instead of direct finance, you go for indirect finance. The banks would solve some of the principal agent problem because they would keep eye on the firm itself, right? They have various mechanisms why they lend, and they will monitor them. They will make sure the collaterals being placed and collaterals being evaluated, reviewed, priced on a periodic basis. You know the concept of mark to market assets, right? So marking to market assets means there are certain type of assets, their prices change every day. Bonds, stocks, even real estate for that matter, that's not necessarily change every day, but it's change on a periodic basis, right? So what they do is, if you have collateralized certain debt instruments with the bank, you have invested in treasury bonds, and these treasury bonds being pledged as collaterals. So what happened there is, the banks would not necessarily take the face value, but they would look at is changing value on the basis of market interest rates. Higher the interest rates, lower the prices. So when interest rates start increasing, even if you have kept 100 worth of treasury bonds, the prices would reduce below 100. So it's a challenge. Right? So there are various ways through which financial intermediaries look at to solve this principal agent problem. Okay, any questions there? Then you see how moral hazard influences financial structure in debt markets. Okay, so what happens here is, moral hazard after the event, after the contract, after the transaction, you take additional risks. That is the moral hazard. You don't necessarily follow all the standards set by the lender. So what happened here is, the borrowers, they have incentives to take projects which are riskier than the lenders would like. People would not lend you if they really realize your project is risky, because they don't want to risk their resources. If that's the case, they wanted to risk their resources, they can go and they can play at casinos, okay, and they can spend their assets through various other riskier avenues. But the borrowers would not necessarily highlight these risky elements at the beginning of the project. If not, even if they highlighted the project, they would keep these risky aspects wrapped, if not kept silent. Okay, and the element of risk in projects evaluated by lenders, that is financial intermediaries, also to some extent would reveal, the banks would look at your project proposal and they know to some extent some risks are there, and they would basically cover those risks with collateral and other proposed arrangements. Even sometimes they would propose some changes to the project, but the actual owners who get the money would not necessarily follow all that. And even after the transaction, because of the moral hazard influence, they would move towards that risky arrangements that they have proposed. Okay, so similarly, if anything happens in this type of a situation, if anything happens, the borrowers would not openly kind of not pay the loan to the bank. They would simply started the non-paying arrangements, or they would kind of default. And what's left with the financial intermediary is possibly the plant, or the company or the collaterals that they have pledged. They are not worried of those things. There are various ways that the market is, financial market is now employing different tactics and arrangements to overcome this type of probabilities. But this happened even the financial crisis. We will be starting to discuss that as the next discussion, right? The financial crisis topic, we will be looking at all the challenges, the risky investments the firms made in the housing market, mainly the subprime housing market. That means low credit quality subprime market means below sub is below, prime is highest, below highest standard credit. They have extended loans to people who can buy houses. So we will look into that in our next area of discussion. But the way through which the debt contracts works in debt markets is that anything happens, they leave these assets to the financial intermediary and run away. I mean, when I say run away, it is not necessarily right for me to say run away. They do not honor, they default and go away. But now, for instance, you have credit information bureaus. When that happens, they get blacklisted. So they would not be able to assess financial markets or financial intermediaries until they clear their names. But it's a long process, it's a long shot. But this happens in markets. Okay, so these possibilities exist everywhere, and the moral hazard to some extent favor people to enter into debt contracts rather than equity contracts, because you yourself know how risky your project is. So you don't reveal that to the lenders. Okay, so you yourself don't want to put your money because it's risky. Anything happens, you lose. But you try to raise this money through a financial intermediary without revealing the riskiness to the financial intermediary in the first place. Once you start the project, you move into that. So the financial intermediaries are mindful of these things, right? That's why they price even a good customer with the probability that treating that party also as an average customer in the exercise. So there's a possibility that, you know, markets price these things in consideration of probabilities of risk. Right. So what are the tools these markets using in managing this moral hazard probabilities in debt contract? As you already know, net worth and collateral. Right. So you lend to the project. The borrower would be happy to collateralize the plant and the machinery because he has the intention to engage in much more riskier project operation than what his standard module might say. So anything happens, then he can leave the plant and the machinery because that's been collateralized, and wash his hands away. No, the financial intermediaries would not necessarily take it in such possibilities. So they bring in incentive compatible. So what they do is, okay, we have collateralized your plant and machinery, but because you are operating above the capacity that you should generally operate, because of that, wear and tear of your machinery is high, but probability that you are making higher profit during this period being considered into the equation, and then make sure that the profits generated by the organization would not be distributed across owners, but they encourage some amount of retained profits. You make 1 million profit, but only 500,000 being distributable. Balance half you had to retain in the organization. These are the ways through which they try to address these. Other thing is net worth. Net worth is of the owner's all assets, not only the plant and machinery. Okay, so anything happens to plant and machinery, if required, beyond the plant and machinery, they take owners' other assets. Let's say investments in treasury securities. So that's a way through which probable moral hazard actions under debt contracts being checked by the organizations. Okay. Then the other one is monitoring and enforcement of restrictive covenants. Okay. So you have monitoring and enforcement. Monitor what you are doing in the project. If you are doing a bad or risky venture, then there are enforcements like you've been asked to pay 20% of the loan ahead of time, or you've been asked to bring additional collateral, new collateral into the equation, or you've been forced to, punished to pay penalties. Okay, so these things are restrictive covenants. Then the agreement itself, you write down things that you should not be doing or things that you should not be overdoing, right? So these elements would make sure undesired behavior being managed. That discourage, that means he prefers to do risky a project arrangement, but this is undesirable behavior. But because of this enforcement, that's become less desirable. He's discouraged now. And other side of the discouragement is the encouragement for right thing. Do right thing now. You behave nicely. Don't try to copy from your friend sitting next to you in the examination, but you study, learn, and answer the questions. And the enforcement is at the time of your enrollment itself to the university, they say if you get caught to cheating, plagiarism, copying other people's work, right, just taking out other people's research report and reproduce as yours, that's plagiarism, right? Cut and basically paste things without actually contributing yourself. You have restrictive covenants in the form of enforcement now. So if you get caught to such, you will be expelled from the university. Your studentship would be cancelled. You would be blacklisted. So that monitoring and enforcement discourage undesirable, but encourage desirable. Similarly, collaterals valuable. You just don't take the collaterals. You take the collateral and value them in line with market prices. Mark-to-market collateral arrangement. And if your collaterals are losing value, you have to bring in additional bonds into the equation. Then provide information. Okay, you've been asked to provide information on a continuous basis. You have to file reports. You have to provide the substantive information in the form of, let's say, production cycles, videos, if not independence referrals. You've been asked to provide information by an assessor. Every 6 months, an assessor comes and assesses the plant and machinery status, whether you employ employers of required standards, whether you provide them with the required facilities, we all monitor. So these help to address, if not check, moral hazard in debt contracts. Then the financial intermediation. You see, for everything, financial intermediation looks like a solution now. Financial intermediaries, the banks and other financial intermediaries, they themselves have mechanisms to solve possible moral hazard behavior in debt contracts. Right? So you see the financial intermediation, there are parties to the transactions. These parties to the transaction would look at the moral hazard probabilities in debt contracts, but financial intermediation would definitely see ways and means. As their expertise in, they know the areas where the moral hazard would be high and probable, and they have different ways of monitoring and collateralizing things. And also they would bring into the contracts itself the probabilities of reducing possible moral hazard actions by the parties to the transaction. So the financial intermediation remain one of the key tools that addresses these probabilities in financial markets. And now you see almost everything that we discussed in this section being now reproduced in a summarized table. So you know asymmetric information related problems, those are adverse selection, moral hazards, and moral hazard can be broken into equity contracts, that is the agency theory principal agent problem, and then the moral hazard that can be broken down to the debt contracts. So these are all asymmetric driven. And what tools that we have to solve them? We studied them also. So when you see adverse selection, you have tools, the private production and sale of information. We discussed that. And you now know, out of 8 facts that we discussed, the private production and sale of information would solve and explain fact number 1 and 2. Then also you looked at government regulation to increase information. That would explain the fact number 5. Then you see financial intermediation, collateral and net worth. That solve respective fact numbers that we highlighted at the very beginning. Then the other side of the equation, the moral hazard, this happens after the transaction. Adverse selection happens before the transaction. The moral hazard can be broken down to equity contracts, that is principal agent problem, okay, owners managers problem. You can put it like that if you require. And then the moral hazard in debt contracts. The moral hazard in equity contracts can be solved through production of information, that is monitoring exercise. Then you see government regulation to increase information. And again, like adverse selection, you can see it here too. Then the financial intermediation again. And debt contract itself used as a tool to minimize principal agent problem. Invariably, moving to debt contracts by principals or the owners, we discussed that would signal the moral hazard probability of owners or the principal itself. But then to solve moral hazard in debt contracts, you look at collateral and net worth, monitoring and enforcement of restrictive covenants, financial intermediation. So you have everything here, and the facts that you are looking at, 8 facts, that also in the same, the summary table here. For instance, if you look at monitoring and enforcement of restrictive covenants, that addresses and explain the fact number 8, that is, debt contracts have numerous restrictive covenants. In the covenants itself, they have brought in different terms and conditions and applications and evaluations, mechanisms, things. So likewise, you can read this and try to understand and try to apply to the list of facts that we discussed in line with the asymmetry related consideration. So the financial structures try to address these, and you can see from here, for all problems, almost all the asymmetry related problems, financial intermediation remains a solution. So that itself would argue what you have seen in empirical exposure levels in financial markets, where the financial intermediation remain the foremost financing, external financing source for businesses throughout the world. Direct finance, yes, it expands, evolve, but still remain less in comparison to financial intermediation. Any questions? Right. Then we'll briefly look at so-called asymmetric information in emerging, transitional, and developing countries. The advanced economies, OECD countries, have a certain level of deployment because their markets are reasonably advanced and sound to great extent. Whereas emerging markets and developing markets have some weaknesses already inbuilt in their systems. Okay, so there's a possibility that in these markets, the financial repression, actually financial repression comes through the institutional environment prevail in these economies. But I just highlight one fact while I'm discussing this. The financial crisis that we would be discussing in the coming lecture would highlight you the probability that these possibilities or the institutional features even remained among OECD countries during the financial crisis and the period before that, and even now to some extent. But these are a little more common and significant in developing and transitional economies. So you probably see in these economies, system of property rights remain poor. So because of this reason, use of collateral remain less efficient. You should have rights for your own production. You write a book. That book is your right. But any earnings arising from this book is yours. Okay, you are an artist. You have a music production. You have a film, but how effective the property rights are. Even if you have a realistic property, let's say land and buildings, how quickly the legal system has remedies for you in the event some litigations being applied upon you. So the financial repression arises from possible institutional weaknesses in property rights, legal system in existence, then accounting standards. I mean, Sri Lanka's accounting standards, of course, one of the best in the world, and accepted across OECD countries. So you find the accounting standards are very high in the case of Sri Lanka. But then what you are simply seeing here is among transitional and developing economies, there may be cases of weak accounting standards. You cannot compare the accounts prepared in the country, developing and transitional economy, and in a OECD or advanced economy. So the way in which that they have treated same element may compound the problem and cannot be verified in their account statements. So that make the access to good information difficult, and as a result, asymmetry becomes broader and wider in these possibilities. And then the government intervention. In these markets, financial intermediation remains, but sometimes the financial intermediation is forced by the government. The banks being forced to lend to parties who are close to the political authority. So it's a directed credit program. So it's not necessarily the financial intermediary assessing adverse selection or moral hazard. Naturally, selection being weakened by directed credit. Moral hazard being enhanced by government engagement. So people themselves become complacent and they expect bank to write off the loans that they have extended. It's a very difficult challenge. So the funds channel would not be used in the productive use. That becomes less efficient. So this is a possibility in transitional and developing countries. Then, of course, financial development and economic growth. The financial system you probably see in developing and transitional countries have many difficulties to operate efficiently. For instance, the direct financial structures in those transitional and developing economies require many system improvements, infrastructure improvements, usage of latest ICT in the exercising of financial markets, and even contract application. You don't have the contracts, which is a standard, minimum standard of best practices being covered. So then it's difficult to operate efficiently. And we already discussed the system of property rights, then other functions which actually have efficiency concern, make these arrangements to be used in the economic prosperity and growth through financial markets. And the financial structures do not grow in such circumstances. That become less efficient. Okay, so here, this chart that I have brought in here is to some extent is reflective of some of the efficiencies that Sri Lanka is already having. But when it comes to other markets, you probably not see this type of see a kind of a long-term yield curve. You can price your assets, you can collateralize, you can reinforce mark-to-market pricing structures. Okay, and Sri Lanka's case, you see at different periods, like here yield curve in terms of 10th July, this is the blue one. 1 month ago, 6 months ago, you see it's coming down. But what you are basically seeing here is, right, this yield structures that we are now seeing here is to great extent efficiently priced to factor in a usage of market-based financial structures in Sri Lanka. And also you are looking at here the spread between longer tenor versus the medium, if not 2-year tenors. Spread is about 250 basis points, about 2.5 percentage points in this one, the most recent one that you are seeing here. But here it is lower. The one that you are seeing here, you see the short end is very low and the long end appears to be a little high, right? So that's why the spread is 250. But what I'm trying to say is, yes, we are efficient to some extent in applying market-based financial structures in Sri Lanka. Stock market also reasonably efficient, you know that. This information you will not necessarily see. That's why I have given the link also. You can follow some of this on a regular basis. And the spread like this has space to further improve in the sense to reduce. That means the yield curve to flatten, not steep here. It flatten. So that would make markets little more efficient. So to say that the application where Sri Lanka has some elements of financial development and economic growth in terms of reasonably efficient market structure, financial market structure, both direct and indirect, and application of property rights and related other consideration. As I said, accounting standards were high, legal systems, there are enough space to improve. A government intervention is one weakness where directed credit is still prevalent. Okay, and the pain is mostly on state-owned financial intermediaries. So this needs to be improved to some extent. So it's an application for you to kind of see these things and try to kind of interpret on Sri Lanka. So that's broadly what I wanted to discuss under this topic. Any questions that you have? If not, we will start the financial crisis in our next discussion. Next discussion is due next Saturday, but I request you to check with IBSL in the morning hours whether we will have this session next Saturday. There's a possibility I might not be able to have the class, but we'll confirm it towards latter part of next week. So you check before you log in for the discussion. If not, we will start our discussion the following week, not next week, but the following week. So if you don't have any further question, thank you very much, and we'll see whether we will meet next week or the following week. Thank you.